When we look at the second row of the Aviator, the spacing inside of it is actually pretty nice. Now, one caveat to that is the middle seat. So when we get the bench seat inside of the Aviator, it does make things a little bit tight. So the seat itself is locked into place, so we can't slide it forwards or backwards at all. So the one downside to this bench seat is it's locked into place. But, I mean, do you go for the bench seat? Do you go for the dual captain's chairs with or without the console? It's going to be a matter of preference. The console is kind of neat because we've got a little armrest control there. We can control the shade on top of that from the second row. So it's really going to be a matter of preference which way you go. But if you do have the bench seat, we can drop down, push open some cup holders, which is kind of cool. So very straightforward there. It is really, really nice. Now, the second row seats are very comfortable at the same time. So, I mean, we could pull in order to be able to kind of recline the seat. And then, so this is with the seat fully reclined back as far as it's going to go. I've got 3-ish, a little over 3 inches of headspace there. So plenty of space. Could you fit 3 full-size versions of me in the second row? I mean, technically, with the big one being this middle seat instead. So it is very, very tight for me inside of the middle seat of the bench. So whether or not you decide to go that route, I did mention it's going to be a matter of preference, but spacing wise isn't too bad. But some basic features and styling though. We do have all of the same highlights that we saw along the driver's side door back here. So we've got the nice highlight along the side. We've got that beautiful interior kind of leather that flows throughout the door, follows all the way throughout the seats on top of that, which is pretty cool. Now on top of that, we have this little control pad in the back, which gives us the flexibility of being able to control the seats, the climate, we can control the audio as well, which is fantastic. And we've got general settings there too. But we do have the control for our heated second row seats on the outboard. So it doesn't matter if you have the bench seat or the dual captain's chairs, the outboard seats are the only seats that are going to be heated inside of this vehicle. We've got all of our different bottle holders along the door. I did mention we've got some cup holders there. We've got some pockets behind the first row seats. And then just underneath the bottom part of the armrest, we do have 2 more power points. Well, I should say, I guess technically 3, because we've got a USB, USB-C, as well as a traditional wall outlet back here too. But the plugs that you get are going to depend on how you have your vehicle configured. As we move up overhead, we do have, our handles, so assist handle, driver, passenger side with a little clothing hook on both sides. And then we also do have a little light control back here too. Now, one other cool thing is that we do have a second row shade back here. So things are a little bit too bright. All we have to do, up and over, in order to block things off, and it blocks it off nicely. So it darkens things up as you saw there. So, I mean, really, really easy to use. It's kind of nice all at the same time. I like it. Let's see what's going on with that third row. All right, now getting into the third row of the Aviator, pretty straightforward. Now, I did mention we do have the option for either the bench seat, like what we're looking at here, or we've got the dual captain's chairs. So, I mean, obviously, if we had the dual captain's chairs, we could just kind of walk and waddle our way back through to that third row if we wanted to. But because we've got the bench instead, we actually have to move the seat. So, in order to do that, we've got a button right along the top of the seat. That's going to power fold it forward, and ooh, back we go. So, let's get that headrest back up again. So, spacing wise, in the third row, it's a little bit tight. So when I'm sitting off to the left-hand side a little bit, easy enough for me to sit in the seat to a degree. Like knee space is actually, it's pretty tight back here. So, I mean, my right knee is kind of touching the middle seat here, and that's the downside of getting the bench because, let's just get this out of the way for you. If you have people that are a little bit taller, I mean, yeah, we could just fold the bench down and it makes it a little bit easier, but if we get the dual captain's chairs instead, you just kind of throw your legs up and over if you needed to kind of stretch out a little bit. Unless you've got kids, because we've got all of our anchor points and tethers and things like that in the second and the third row. So if you need front-facing, rear-facing child seats, not going to have an issue whatsoever. But I mean, you could fit 2 full-size versions of me back here. With the bench, it's going to be a little tight because that bench seat is locked into place. So we can't slide it forwards or backwards at all. So if you know you're going to have 4 or 5 adults in there, probably a good idea to go for the dual captain's chairs instead of the bench, just to give a little bit more leg room to people that are in this third row instead. But With the seat back kind of its minimal distance, along the left side, I've got more than enough space, but it still comes down to that middle seat. It would be very, very tight back here for me. Overall, just impressions of the seat itself in the third row. Not quite as comfortable as what we found inside of the second row. It still is nice that we've got a third row seat here though. But I mean, if I had to go on longer distance trips, wouldn't necessarily mind it too much. We've got a nice leather here. But one thing that would be really, really cool in this third row is that if we had seats that could recline a tiny little bit. So unfortunately, these things are locked into place, but I mean, at the same time, there is still technically room for 2 full-size versions of me back here. Now, other things to point out, we do have a little storage tray along both the driver-passenger side. We do have some cup holders back here. And then we've got a little overhead light on top of that. One cool thing is that we do have essentially quad zone climate control, I guess is what we can say, because we've got our dual zone for the front, we've got single zone for the middle, and then we do have controls through that console behind the first row armrest in order to control what's going on with the temperature in the third row, which is kind of nice. But overall, spacing, styling-wise is pretty nice. I do wish the seats were a tiny bit more comfortable and that they could recline a little bit, but overall, this is pretty good. Now, getting out, really simple. We've got a few different ways that we can get into the cargo area of the vehicle. We've got our foot-activated liftgate. We can do it on the key fob. We can do it just to the left-hand side of the steering wheel. But if you wanted to, you could also manually do it yourself. We do have a little button. So just underneath that second L in Lincoln, we've got a button there. We're just going to push. Up it goes. But let's have a peek at the cargo dimensions. All right, now the Aviator does have a pretty good amount of space to it for just the cargo area by itself. If you need that tiny little bit more, we could just lift this whole thing up and kind of store it in the back. That's going to give us a bit more height there as well, which is kind of nice. But we do have, as you can see there, 3 individual rows. So if we need a little bit more space, what we could do is just in the back here, we've got a series of buttons. So we can fold down the left seat, the right seat, or both seats together if we want to. So we just do a press, down it goes. And as you can see there, so it is going to be a power down and power back up for the third row. Second row is just going to be a manual fold up and down. But I mean, as you can see there, it does open things up nicely. Now, this one is obviously going to be the bench seat because we've got that third seat, so the middle seat there. But whether you go for the 6 or 7 seater is going to depend on you. But I mean, one of the benefits of having that bench or the dual captain's chairs instead of the bench is that you would be able to kind of slide things in there. We could fold that seat down fairly easily all at the same time. So just from the inside here, if we wanted to, we could just crank this tab over top and down that seat goes. And then just along the side of the second row, we've got a release there, but I mean, it opens it up even more when we've got that second and third row folded down. So it's going to be a matter of how much space do you actually need inside of this thing. Like I said, because we can easily fold down the second and third row, the bench seat, not necessarily a bad thing unless we're trying to get some larger people into the third row on top of that. That's the one time I'd probably recommend looking at the dual captains instead of the bench seat, but overall, this styling is pretty nice and there's still a pretty good amount of space inside of this thing.